December 1987. A family murdered in their home. Authorities quickly found a suspect who was later acquitted, and the case was closed. A family taken in the dark of winter. 3 lives erased from a quiet Wichita street in a way that left investigators wanting and the town whispering for answers. Beneath the surface of that night, something else was left behind, a pattern. A whisper stitched into notes and letters, a code that waited decades for someone to finally read it. Tonight, Carrie Drobin Shivago gives voice to the Fager family. She walks into the rooms they once lived in, reads the lines that others skim past, and hears what the silence was trying to say. If you think you know this case, listen again. If you think codes are puzzles to solve, listen closer. This is Alternative Eye Beyond the File. This is Chapter 8 Continues, The Fager Family. And this is Carrie Drobin Shivago. Take it away.
On a quiet street in Wichita, Kansas in 1987, the Fager home looked like any other. 2 stories of brick and timber with white shutters on a front porch that faced the long prairie horizon. Inside lived Philip, Mary, Kelly, and Sherry, a close-knit family whose lives on the surface reflected everything Wichita prided itself on: hard work, modest comfort, quiet ambition. Philip, or Melvin, as his co-workers at Boeing's military airplane division called him, was a financial analyst, a man described as particular, almost meticulous. The kind of man who washed his car twice a week, balanced the checkbook to the penny, and pruned his hedges in perfect symmetry. He'd recently overseen an addition to his house, a sunroom and a basement hot tub. Small luxuries maybe, but proof that life was finally going well. Mary, his wife of 11 years, was out of town that week visiting relatives in Emporia. Their oldest daughter, Kelly, was 16, a high school junior, part-time McDonald's employee, and cheerleader, with an easy laugh and a steady boyfriend named Todd. What could be better than that? Their youngest, Sherry, was 9. Sweet, shy, still finding her way after transferring schools. Together, they were the kind of family you'd see in a Christmas card. But by the time Mary returned home, the next day, December 31st, 1987, that picture had shattered. She unlocked the front door around noon. The house was quiet, too quiet. She called out for Philip. No answer. Then she saw him, lying face down in the living room. Breathless, frantic, she ran across the street to call for help. One of the first officers to arrive was Ken Landwehr, a name that would later become synonymous with another investigation, BTK. At first, Mary thought the girls had gone out, maybe taken the family's gray 1983 Volkswagen Rabbit, which Kelly sometimes drove. She had no idea they were still inside the home. When investigators searched the home, they found Philip had been shot twice in the back, 1 bullet piercing his heart. He was fully clothed, still wearing his overcoat. There were no signs of a break-in, no ransacking, no struggle. The doors were locked. And then, in the basement, nearly 36 hours after the investigation, officers opened the lid of the hot tub. Under the fabric cover lay Kelly and Sherry. Kelly was nude, unbound, floating in the now cold water. Sherry was still in her pajamas, her wrists tied behind her back with black electrician's tape. She had been asphyxiated, then submerged in the same water. Can you imagine the horror Mary must have experienced learning in an instant that everything, everyone she loved most in the world had been taken from her, inside the very home that was meant to keep them safe? The only thing missing from the Fager home was the family's 1983 gray four-door diesel Volkswagen Rabbit, Sedgwick County license number E353. But there was someone else missing, too. William T. Butterworth, the man who'd been working on the family's new solarium, an unfinished project that now stood like a half-built tomb at the back of the house. Butterworth was no drifter. He was a husband, a father to 6-month-old twins and a 3-year-old, a veteran and a respected member of the Wichita Area Home Builders Association. But lately, his life had started to unravel. Work had dried up, his finances were collapsing, and when the Fagers hired him, giving him keys to their home so he could come and go as he pleased, it might have seemed like salvation. Instead, it became the start of a nightmare. When police found Butterworth's van abandoned at the McDonald's where 16-year-old Kelly Fager worked, the first question wasn't why, it was how. How did a man trusted enough to hold their keys end up vanishing the same day they were slaughtered? Butterworth's wife, frantic, filed a missing persons report. 3 days later, the phone rang in Wichita. Butterworth was on the line from Florida. He said he didn't know how he'd gotten there, didn't know what had happened. His wife told him the police were looking for him, and moments later, as he stood at a payphone hundreds of miles away, officers moved in. He was arrested mid-call. To police, it looked like an open and shut case. The contractor flees the scene of a brutal family murder, driving the victim's car, claiming amnesia. He was charged with grand theft auto and the murders of Philip, Kelly, and Sherry Fager, held on a $500,000 bond. But the details didn't add up. Butterworth told investigators he could remember nothing. No blood, no gunshots, no drive to Florida. Just blank space. He recalled hearing a news report about the Fagers and realized something was terribly wrong and called his wife. The more he insisted he couldn't remember, the stranger it all seemed. Because if Butterworth was guilty, he'd pulled off one of the most chilling family murders in Kansas since BTK. But if he wasn't, then who had? And why had the Fagers, a family so ordinary and meticulous, become such extraordinary targets? Butterworth appeared gaunt, hollowed out by exhaustion and fear. His voice trembled as he pieced together flashes of memory, images that came in fragments like broken film reels spliced out of order. He said he remembered seeing the Fagers' Volkswagen in the driveway as he returned from the mall. Inside, the house was quiet, too quiet. He walked through the new solarium door, expecting to see Kelly or her father. Instead, his eyes fell on Sherry, face up in the hot tub. The water was still. Her pajamas floated around her like a ghostly shroud. He tried to lift her, realized she wasn't breathing. Panic overtook him. Inside the living room, he found Philip Fager on the floor, lifeless. Butterworth knelt beside him, saw keys scattered on the carpet, and picked them up, his hands shaking. He stumbled outside, tried to start his van, but the keys didn't fit. Furious, disoriented, he hit the steering wheel. That's when he realized the keys belonged to Philip. He grabbed a bag of new clothes he'd bought earlier and fled in the Fagers' Volkswagen, his mind a blur of terror and disbelief. He later told detectives he felt cowardly for running away. But his account raised more questions than answers. If Kelly was found in the same hot tub as her sister, how could he not have seen her? The spa wasn't huge. Jurors and even investigators wondered, was this the story of a traumatized man who stumbled onto a crime scene, or the confession of a killer rewriting his guilt into confusion? On May 14, 1988, under hypnosis with Dr. Pace, Butterworth revisited the house in his mind. His words came haltingly, as though dragged up from some dark corner of memory. He said he'd entered the home to call for help after finding Sherry. He remembered kneeling beside Philip, his coat damp from the spa water, when he thought he heard something, a sound from the basement. At first he thought it was the family dog. Then he froze. It wasn't the dog, he said. I thought someone was down there. I was so scared. He turned toward the front door, desperate to leave, when he heard another sound, a faint, choking cry that rose and broke in the silence, like somebody trying to scream, he said. And I couldn't, his voice trailed off. Moments later, he was gone behind the wheel of the Fager's car, driving without destination or memory. He would later tell Dr. Pace he'd tried to go home, but couldn't face his wife, couldn't face what he'd seen or done. What if it had been my kid, he asked through tears. He drove for hours, stopping at an ATM to withdraw money, circling his own house before continuing on, finally crossing state lines into Florida. If I hadn't been such a coward, he said, maybe Kelly would still be alive. It was a confession, not of murder, but of failure. A man haunted by what he did or what he didn't do. Ultimately, Butterworth was tried and acquitted of the murders. There were lots of people in Wichita who were angry at the verdict. The police were so confident they had the right guy, they closed the case, blamed the jury. But there was someone else, and the Fager's lives fit his victimology, a domestic tableau of beauty and order just waiting to be undone. Trauma doesn't end when the headlines fade. It lingers in the spaces where silence should be merciful, inside the walls of the house, in pauses between breath and sleep. For the Fager case, that trauma had many victims, even among the living. Mary Fager returned to a home she no longer recognized. The smell of detergent still clung to the air. The carpet still held her daughter's laughter, faintly like an echo trapped in the fibers. But everything familiar had suddenly become grotesque. Survivors like Mary often describe a strange split in time, before and after. Before, there was order, rhythm, a life measured in routines and school drop-offs and family dinners. After, there was the unrelenting noise of grief, the hollow spaces where voices used to be. Mary's trauma wasn't just in the loss, it was in the questions that followed. Why them? Why here? And worse, why not me? Survivor's guilt becomes a cruel kind of gravity. It drives you back to the moment you wish you could undo. Even for William Butterworth, whether innocent or complicit, the psychological toll was enormous. People saw him as the prime suspect, but what they couldn't see was the wreckage inside him, the confusion, the fragmented memories, the looping nightmares. When he said he couldn't remember, maybe he meant it. Trauma has a way of erasing what the mind can't bear to hold. Experts call it moral injury. The moment when a person's sense of what's right and safe is obliterated. It's not just fear, it's a betrayal of one's own beliefs about goodness, about being capable of helping or saving others. For Mary, it meant questioning faith. For Butterworth, it meant questioning sanity. In small towns like Wichita, where everyone knows everyone's business, trauma doesn't fade quietly. Grief becomes spectacle. But no one truly knows what it's like to stand in Mary's shoes or to be the man who found her family's bodies and then ran. For victims and survivors alike, the Fager murders become a lifelong sentence, not one imposed by a judge, but by memory. Because the truth about trauma is this: it doesn't end with justice. It only begins there.
Thank you, Carrie, for bringing life back to these amazing people whose lives were lost. I know they're still on the hearts and minds of many people. I wanted to pause to connect with you all and really just take a moment, because even in the last 10 days, the advancements in these cases, in my decoding and in our investigation as Alternative Eye, has taken quite a turn. My goal in the next few episodes is to really bring you back to what we can share with the public and that call to action and what that means. Legally, there are a lot of hurdles here. There have been with these investigations in general, and we're trying to shine a light. We're trying to do right by these families, like so many of those who have dedicated their lives to these cases. So we're going to jump back on with Wendy real quick. We're going to break some stuff down. We're going to talk about those hurdles and get her perspective. Our audience, we're challenging you, and we appreciate you tuning in and staying sharp.
Today, Wendy, even if it's a methodology that they can't accept, I might be a little bit of a weirdo or something. They like to say I'm in a certain percentage bracket of intelligence operationally, but I just like to think that's an old-fashioned way of saying you're weird. So regardless of the methodology. What's the barrier here legally?
As a fellow weirdo, I am here to tell you that legally it is problematic, right? Law enforcement has things they have to do, and that is slow, right? They are a bureaucracy, and that is slow. I promise you, the court system is slower. We didn't even have online law school classes until essentially COVID. And most law schools don't have any online education programs, despite the fact that we have the technology to do that. Judges tend to be, they tend to be older. They tend to be a little more sort of conservative in their worldviews. And they tend to be pretty suspicious of anything that sort of smacks of weirdness. And so, in terms of probable cause, before you can really use any technology, it has to legally, at least as evidence in a case, right? In that capacity, it has to sort of pass what we call the Daubert test. And that requires that it be generally accepted in the field. And it has to have a proven track record and a known sort of error rate or something like that. It's very difficult to get new technology or new approaches into the courts. That said, there have definitely been some pretty sus methodologies that the courts have allowed in, some of which have now been shown to be completely false and inaccurate. So in terms of probable cause for a search warrant, the bar's lower, obviously, than it would be if you were trying to prosecute somebody with this. But I think the key is to treat what you do the way they treat investigative genetic genealogy, which it's a lead. And then it's up to law enforcement to take that lead and use it to develop enough more traditional evidence to go to a court. I don't think that courts are going to accept what you do, not because it's not accurate, but because there aren't many people who do it, right? There aren't going to be that many people who can verify that Melissa Phelan actually is really good at this and actually has really good results in a way that is sort of like scientifically convincing.
Yes.
I'm a science nerd, and you have convinced me that, not of absolutely everything, but you've definitely convinced me about the Fager case. I am 100% on board with that. I am a born skeptic, and I think there is something to what you do. I think there's, but I'm not sure it's going to cross that threshold for law enforcement to get a search warrant for somebody's property. Is it enough for them to go and knock on a door and say, hey, would you give us consent to search your property? Absolutely. And it's certainly enough to perhaps put a team, of a couple of cops on or investigators on this issue for a week, right? Don't mean to make light of the amount of resources that actually is, especially for small jurisdictions, but to develop more traditional evidence that they could take to a court. So I think getting a search warrant and really pushing it is going to be hard, but there are roundabout ways, right? Again, unless there's some reason, for example, the private property we were talking about possibly going digging on, somebody owns that, and unless there's some reason to think that the people who own the property were complicit, and I don't think they're the same people who were there, 25, 30, 40 years ago, knock on the door, ask them, could we look around? Could we come inside your barn? Could we take some pictures so that we can then compare them? And then that does create the evidence for a search warrant. That does create the evidence to move forward in a more formal investigative way. It's frustrating because I think you can sort of see the end point, and for law enforcement, what you provide isn't the end point, it has to be the beginning point, and that's super frustrating, but that
It
doesn't
is.
make it any less valuable. right? Again, we can't take IgG results and get a search warrant based on them, I don't think. Well, actually, I think there have been a few jurisdictions, but we certainly couldn't arrest somebody based on investigative genetic genealogy. We don't use the genetic genealogy to get a lead that we give to law enforcement, and then they go and collect evidence and do a formal DNA test using STR DNA, and that's how they move forward with an arrest warrant. That doesn't make the lead any less important, right? That's like being a confidential informant. That's like being the whistleblower. That's like being the tipster. It's the push that gets the ball rolling. And once the ball starts rolling, gravity takes over.
Yes.
So I don't think, I'm not sure a court would accept what you do as the basis for, some sort of constitutionally based document, but that doesn't matter. If it's enough to move law enforcement and give them enough information that they can build the case in a more traditional way, that's all that really ultimately matters, is that we eventually
Yes.
get to that end point.
I think at the end of the day, it doesn't matter really the how I did it. It's
No.
the fact that I am also a profiler. There's a lot of
Right.
labels they've slapped on me over the years, but I am applying all these traditional methods
Right.
interlaced with also remote viewing. So whether or
Right.
not it took me 10 minutes to locate a body just by looking at a map or a last location or photograph of someone,
Right.
because again, my methods vary specifically, and I'll tell you all, I start with a photo and the last known location. The fact I'm able to do that, close my eyes and do that really doesn't even matter when it comes to the end game. Because
Nope.
if I'm able to give you a perp you didn't know before, evidence, or the location of that body, it's a matter of the only how I'm concerned about is how can I get you out there? How can I
Exactly.
build the trust? And so it has
Right.
taken me almost 2 decades of, I can say present day, there's a lot of people that listen to what I say. But as
Hmm.
far as being able to go down to whatever the hell county in USA and say, I think you got a body in a lake, maybe by the end of my life, hopefully somebody might start moving. Goals,
But
Wendy, we all have them.
we do. But that's where your networks come in, right? That's where we can hope that, the successes, the proven successes that you have, and all of these people that you're going to be bringing on who are in law enforcement and are in private investigation and in forensic analysis, who have learned that your methods work, they go and vouch for you. They provide that credibility for the communities that haven't heard of you yet. So in theory, you don't start from the ground floor building credibility with each agency. You're building a network that then provides you with that. And I think at this point you have that network, and now it's just a question of mobilizing them and getting the people in those communities that we need to listen to listen. Um, and it's not just going to be your words speaking for your methods or your words speaking for your tip. It's going to be all of these other people who can say, trust us, listen to her, right? Um, and that's like you said, the how doesn't matter. If who It's interesting. I love to know how things work. I wish I understood how everything in the world worked. I don't. In the end, I don't need to understand how chemotherapy works as long as my tumor goes away. Right?
Yes.
Don't have cancer actually, but you know what I'm
Thank God.
saying. Like I don't care how vaccines work as long as I don't get sick. I'm glad somebody knows. That's important. But not everybody has to know everything. And so that's where we have experts like yourself, and you build a collection of other experts who, again, provide that credibility that you then take out into the field, and collectively you make the case. Look, can't explain it all. I'm going to go way over your heads. Not even sure we could explain it ourselves, but trust us, it works. And that's how you get results.
Yes. And I just want to close out as far as the why, as to why alternative I and why we are doing this. Why are we looking at Dennis Rader in these cases? If it really comes down to the why, which I've shared a little bit of my why today,
Mm-hmm.
it's important to remember that Cynthia's family, how many decades have they been waiting? And if you
Right.
knew where she was, how do you get authorities to act? Mary
Right.
Fager, doesn't she have a right to know if there's evidence out here buried somewhere in Wichita or on these Oklahoma properties that show Rader killed her family? Doesn't she have a right to know? At what point does this institutional inaction become a violation of these families' rights, of our rights? And Wendy, it's so hard to know as citizens because often there's just this blind trust, right? And until you're in it and you've been a victim of crime or your loved ones or your neighbor, and you really see the hurdles that people face, we have
Right.
to seriously know, when is this violation taking place?
Right. Right. And I think it's natural for agencies, again, not talking about individual, for example, law enforcement officers. Every law enforcement officer I know and work with, they are like terriers with a bone, right? They've got a case, they don't ever want to let that go. But institutionally, law enforcement has an incentive to focus on easy cases and recent cases, because recent cases are the ones that are in the news, and that gets them the sort of credit that they need to continue getting funding, and easy cases get them quick results. They gets them more solves in a particular amount of time, and these harder, thornier, longer lasting cases, if they reach a resolution, that's fantastic. But if they don't, then I know to the agency that feels like wasted time. That was time that we spent on a case that isn't going to get us any funding in the next legislative cycle, that isn't going to get us any donations, that isn't going to get us anything, right? And
Yes.
we see this in IGG, actually. There are organizations that will only work on a case for a very limited amount of time, and if they can't solve it, they send it back because they don't want to keep working on something if they can't keep producing solves. And then there are others that never let things go, right? That will work on cases for 5, 6, 7 years. Well, not quite that long. We haven't been around that long, but for as long as it takes. Um, and I think that's kind of the tension. There's that political dynamic that wants people to push ahead and take the easy cases and just rack up points, as opposed to doing the hard things that take more time and are less certain in their outcomes. But I'm with you. I don't think that somebody's death or disappearance being complicated makes them any less valuable or makes their family any less deserving of justice. And yeah, so again, I think you and I share that value of not wanting something to get swept under the rug just because it's hard or just because it's new or just because it doesn't quite make sense to somebody. Take the risks. Go for it. Dig up that barn.
Yeah.
See what you find, because maybe you
Yes.
find nothing, but maybe you find Cynthia Don Kenny, right? And that would be incredible. And yeah,
And she deserves it.
she deserves it and her family deserves it.
And if Mary Fager, if you're by happenstance, you get to listen to this, Cindy, your family, we care about you and we know
Yeah.
in our own way that the systems that we're all up against as Americans, what we deal with just as human beings on a human level, we care about you and we care about the truth. I believe that Bill Butterworth's family also deserves the truth for the record to
Yes.
be set straight.
Yeah.
I look forward through the rest of the season with you and our experts, Wendy, really looking to explore what can families do when law enforcement won't move forward and what are their options. If you have people that are willing for free to go to battle for you within the community, how can we organize to
Right.
truly push these cases forward?
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. How do we build those coalitions that are heavy enough to get the ball rolling down the hill?
This season, it is called Systems of Silence, right? And addressing it. The system has failed these families, not these investigators, not these individual pieces. How do we break that silence is what we aim to do here with Alternative Eye.
Hey y'all, it's your decoder, Melissa. As we close out today's episode, I want to take a moment to check in with you. our audience, our thinkers, our partners in this work. After taking the time to trust the code with me, how are you feeling? I ask, because where we're heading next goes even deeper into the cipher. And before we move forward, it matters that you understand something essential. There is method to this madness. You've seen today some of the hurdles built into this puzzle, the intentional barriers, the complexities, and the challenges of treating a cipher as a legitimate piece of evidence. You've also seen the framework behind the methodology I'm using to decode it. But here's the bigger question. As we advance as a society, as we navigate the tension between human intelligence and the rising age of AI and machines, what more can we do? How do we think smarter, investigate deeper, and refuse to accept the surface as the story? So I challenge you, not just as listeners, but as a community, to think with us, to question with us, to explore with us. And I'm so grateful that you're here doing exactly that. Stay tuned, subscribe, stay close, because what we're going to reveal in the episodes ahead is beyond anything we believe has ever been seen before.